The quiet forest stretched endlessly beneath the orange glow of the setting sun. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and the rustling of leaves filled the air as a breeze rolled through the trees. The peaceful scene was disturbed by a soft hum, almost too faint to notice at first. But as the hum grew louder, the birds scattered. Two sleek, silver pods descended from the sky, weaving gracefully between the towering trees before settling quietly on the forest floor. A faint hiss escaped as the pods opened, revealing two tall figures stepping out. Zorak and Zinnia, identical alien twins, stood side by side, their pale, glimmering skin reflecting the fading sunlight. Their sharp, narrow eyes scanned the area with curiosity and amusement. "So this is Earth," Zinnia scoffed, kicking at the dirt beneath her feet. "I expected more." Zorak laughed, his voice echoing softly. "What could you expect from a species so primitive?" The twins had been sent to Earth by their elders to observe the planet and report back on its inhabitants. The humans, as they were called, were considered weak and insignificant by most of the galaxy. This was simply a study mission, a chance to witness the lesser creatures up close before returning home, with amusing stories to share. As the twins moved through the forest, they heard footsteps. Someone was nearby. Zorak nudged his sister. "Look," he whispered. A figure emerged from the trees. A human male, wearing a worn jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder, stepped into view. He was tall by human standards, but appeared small compared to the twins. His brown hair was slightly messy, and his face carried a calm, unreadable expression. Zinnia smirked. "This is one of them." The man looked at the twins without surprise or fear. He stuffed his hands into his pockets and tilted his head slightly. "Didn't expect visitors today," the man said casually. "You lost." Zorak laughed, folding his arms across his chest. "We don't get lost. We're explorers." The man nodded slowly, eyeing the strange pods behind them. "Explorers, huh? Well, welcome to Earth. I'm Jake." Jake extended his hand, but the twins simply stared at it, not understanding the gesture. Zinnia chuckled. "What fragile creatures," she said, stepping closer to Jake and circling him like a predator sizing up prey. "Your kind is soft. Your anatomy, flawed." Jake lowered his hand, watching them carefully. "You sure about that?" "Oh, very sure," Zorak replied with a grin. He tapped his own arm, revealing muscles that flexed beneath his smooth, pale skin. "Our bodies are stronger, faster, and more efficient than yours. You wouldn't last a second against us." Zinnia leaned in, her sharp eyes narrowing. "It's fascinating, really. How have you even survived this long?" Jake's expression didn't change. He looked at the twins for a long moment before a small smirk crossed his face. "You know," Jake said quietly, "I've heard that before." The twins exchanged glances, curious but unimpressed. Jake continued, his voice steady. "A lot of people, and other species, I'm guessing, look at humans and think we're weak. That's usually their first mistake." Zorak stepped back, laughing. "Oh, this is rich. The human thinks he's tough." Jake shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I just know something you don't." Zinnia's eyes flashed with interest. "Care to prove it, human?" Jake glanced up at the darkening sky. The stars were beginning to peek through the canopy of trees. He exhaled softly and met their gaze with a calm, unwavering stare. "Sure," he said, the smirk still tugging at his lips. "Let's see what you're really made of." For the first time since landing on Earth, the twins felt something unexpected, a flicker of uncertainty. The human didn't look scared. In fact, he looked confident, and that made them curious. As they followed Jake deeper into the forest, the twins couldn't help but wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, humans weren't as fragile as they seemed. The moon hung low over the forest as Jake led the alien twins through the winding paths between the trees. The silver light reflected off their sleek, pale skin, giving them an almost ghostly glow as they moved silently behind him. Zorek's sharp eyes scanned the surroundings with a mixture of boredom and curiosity. "You're not leading us to some hidden human base, are you?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Jake chuckled softly without turning around. "No secret bases here, just something I thought you might enjoy seeing." Zinnia raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly is that?" Jake paused at the edge of a small clearing, gesturing toward the abandoned factory that loomed just ahead. The rusted structure stretched high into the night sky, its shattered windows glinting faintly under the stars. Thick vines crawled up the sides of the building, reclaiming it piece by piece. "This old place," Zorek scoffed. "Is this supposed to impress us?" Jake leaned casually against a crumbling fence. "Not really. But I figured if you're going to judge humanity, you might as well see what we're capable of up close." Zinnia stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. "And how exactly does this broken structure prove anything about your species?" Jake's smirk didn't fade. He pushed off the fence and walked toward a pile of rusted metal beams stacked unevenly nearby. Without a word, he bent down, wrapping his hands around one of the larger beams. The twins watched, their expressions amused, as Jake gritted his teeth and began to lift. The beam groaned in protest, its weight pressing into his muscles. Slowly but surely, Jake straightened, hoisting the beam up and over his shoulders. Zorek chuckled. "Impressive, for a human, but that's nothing compared to what we can do." Zinnia nodded. "Strength isn't your species' strong suit." Jake carefully lowered the beam back to the ground, breathing heavily but steady. He wiped his hands on his jeans and glanced at the twins. "Maybe, but strength isn't everything." Zorek stepped forward, placing one hand against the same beam Jake had just lifted. With a casual push, he sent the heavy metal bar rolling across the ground, as if it weighed nothing. "Strength is everything where we come from," Zorek said smugly. "It's why our kind dominates." Jake tilted his head, watching the beam slide away into the shadows. "I guess it's easy to believe that when no one ever challenges you." Zinnia grinned. "Is that what you're planning to do, Jake? Challenge us?" Jake crossed his arms and smiled. "Not exactly. But I do think you might be underestimating humans in ways that could surprise you." Zorek laughed. "I doubt that. But I'll humor you. What's next?" Jake glanced around the factory and pointed to a large stack of bricks left behind by construction workers years ago. "Endurance," he said simply. "Let's see how long you two can keep up." Zinnia scoffed, but followed Jake to the stack. "Endurance? You really think you can outlast us?" Jake began lifting bricks, one by one, stacking them neatly into a pile a few feet away. "It's not about lifting the heaviest thing once," he explained. "It's about how long you can keep going. See how many you can move before you get tired." The twins exchanged skeptical glances, but soon Zorek joined in, effortlessly tossing bricks two at a time. Zinnia followed suit, lifting 3 at once. At first, it seemed laughable. The twins worked fast, moving bricks at an incredible speed. Jake, on the other hand, continued at his steady, measured pace. Minutes passed, then an hour. Jake's movements remained consistent, while the twins began to slow. Zorek frowned, glancing at Jake, who hadn't stopped. A thin layer of sweat lined his brow, but his eyes remained calm and focused. "How are you still going?" Zinnia muttered under her breath, struggling to keep up. Jake stacked another brick. "Humans aren't built for instant power," he said. "We're built to last." Zorek dropped the last brick in his hands and took a step back, clearly winded. Zinnia followed, wiping her forehead. "That's not normal," Zorek said. "You shouldn't have lasted this long." Jake sat down on a nearby rock, stretching his arms. "Maybe you've been looking at strength the wrong way. We don't win by overpowering others. We win by surviving long enough to outlast them." Zinnia frowned, but didn't argue. There was something unsettling about how calm Jake remained throughout the whole ordeal. Zorak crossed his arms, frustrated but intrigued. All right, I'll admit you're tougher than you look. But endurance doesn't mean much in a real fight. Jake's smile widened. Then let's test that next. The twins leaned in, curiosity burning behind their sharp eyes. Jake stood up, brushing the dirt from his hands. I'll show you the one thing no alien strength can match: human ingenuity. The cold night air settled over the abandoned factory like a thin veil, wrapping the structure in eerie silence. The moonlight barely pierced through the cracked roof, casting long, jagged shadows along the walls. Jake stood near the center of the factory floor. The faint creak of his boots, the only sound as he examined the worn-out machinery that had been left behind. Zorak and Zinnia trailed closely behind, their alien eyes adjusting effortlessly to the dim light. The twins moved with a quiet confidence, as if the crumbling walls of the human structure could collapse, and they'd still walk away unarmed. So what exactly is this first test, Jake? Zorak asked, his voice echoing faintly through the empty space. Jake knelt down by a rusted steel beam lying across the ground. Strength is one thing, he said calmly, but let's see how well you handle precision under pressure. Zinnia smirked. Pressure? You think there's anything on this planet that could make us nervous? Jake chuckled softly to himself as he dragged an old toolbox closer, flipping it open with a metallic snap. Inside were various worn tools, hammers, screwdrivers, and other relics left by the factory workers long ago. He set a small mechanical device on the ground between them. It was a makeshift bomb, though not a real one, more of a puzzle, a device Jake had constructed from scrap parts during his time working on Earth's military tech. The wires crisscrossed haphazardly, blinking faintly with a small LED light. Jake tapped the side of the device. This is simple. Deactivate it before the timer hits 0. Zorak crouched down, inspecting the device with disinterest. We've handled complex machinery far beyond this level. You might as well give up now. Zinnia stepped forward confidently. We're more advanced, Jake. No offense, but this is child's play. Jake leaned against a nearby pillar, arms crossed. All right, you've got 5 minutes. The LED screen flashed to life, displaying a countdown. 5 o'clock, 4:59, 4:58. Zinnia knelt beside the bomb and swiftly pulled out a thin tool from the folds of her suit, beginning to dissect the wires. Zorak watched over her shoulder, occasionally pointing to various connections as she worked. At first, it seemed easy. The twins moved with coordinated precision, carefully separating wires and removing small components one by one. But as the clock ticked down to 3 o'clock, Zorak's eyes narrowed. Something's off, he muttered, inspecting the interior of the device. This doesn't follow any logical design. Jake smiled faintly. Nope, it doesn't. Zinnia hesitated for the first time, her hands hovering over a cluster of wires. This isn't standard circuitry. What is this mess? It's improvised, Jake explained. Humans don't always have the luxury of perfect tools or resources. We adapt. We build with whatever we have. The countdown ticked past 2:30. Zorak growled under his breath, pulling out one of the wires. The loud beeping sound erupted from the device. Wrong one, Jake said casually. Try again. Zinnia shot Jake a glare of frustration creeping into her usually calm expression. You intentionally made this chaotic. There's no logic to it. Exactly, Jake replied. Welcome to the real world. Problems aren't always neat and organized. The clock hit 1:45. Zorak's hands moved faster, but the more they tampered with the bomb, the more complex it seemed to become. New compartments opened, revealing layers of wires beneath, like a puzzle that shifted the more they tried to solve it. Zinnia shook her head. This isn't possible. How do humans even function with designs like this? Jake shrugged. We make it work. 1 o'clock. Zorak pulled back, breathing heavily, and Zinnia's hands dropped to her sides. The device blinked relentlessly, counting down the seconds. Jake stepped forward. May I? Without waiting for an answer, he knelt beside the bomb, reaching into the wiring. His hands moved quickly but precisely, and in less than 10 seconds, the device powered down with a soft click. 010. The twins stared at him in disbelief. "How did you?" Zinnia began, but Jake cut her off with a simple smile. "You were overthinking it," he said. "It wasn't about the complexity. It was about seeing the bigger picture." Zorak crossed his arms, clearly frustrated. "That wasn't fair. You designed it to be chaotic." Jake stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "And how do you think we've survived this long? Humans don't win by brute strength or superior biology. We win by adapting faster than anyone else." Zinnia's eyes narrowed, but there was a glimmer of curiosity in her gaze. "I'll admit, that was unexpected." Jake met her gaze with a calm expression. "You thought we were weak because we look fragile. But fragility forces innovation. It forces growth." For the first time, neither twin had a smug retort. Zorak exhaled sharply, clearly still processing the failure. "All right, Jake. You've proven you can defuse bombs, but how does that help in the middle of a battlefield?" Jake's smile returned. "Funny you should ask. Let's find out." As Jake walked deeper into the factory, the twins followed, their confidence slightly shaken but their curiosity burning brighter than ever. The more they learned about humanity, the more they realized perhaps strength wasn't always about power. Perhaps it was about something far more dangerous. The moon hung higher now, casting a pale silver glow over the forest. The rusted beams of the abandoned factory stretched like skeletal fingers toward the night sky. A faint breeze whispered through the trees, stirring the leaves but leaving the clearing eerily still. Jake stood at the edge of the factory grounds, gazing toward a narrow dirt path that trailed deeper into the woods. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air, but his posture remained relaxed, like a man who had nothing to prove, yet everything under control. Behind him, Zorak and Zinnia shifted restlessly. The earlier failure with Jake's improvised bomb still lingered in their minds. For the first time, the twins felt a flicker of doubt, not in their strength, but in the human standing before them. Zinnia finally broke the silence. "I don't see how this next test changes anything, Jake. Endurance? Running for hours? How does that compare to what we can do?" Jake turned, hands casually resting in his pockets. "Endurance isn't just about running. It's about survival. It's about how far you can go when everything around you says stop." Zorak crossed his arms, unimpressed. "We've traveled across galaxies. Humans barely make it past their own moon. You think we don't understand endurance?" Jake smiled faintly, his gaze shifting toward the dense forest. "Maybe, but let's see how well you handle Earth's terrain." Without another word, Jake started walking down the path, the crunch of leaves under his boots, the only sound cutting through the quiet. Zorak and Zinnia exchanged glances before following, their long strides easily keeping pace with him. The path of resistance. The forest closed in around them, thick branches overhead blocking out much of the moonlight. Shadows danced along the path, twisting into strange shapes as the wind tugged at the trees. For the first mile, the twins moved effortlessly. Their advanced musculature allowed them to glide over rocks and fallen logs with ease, barely registering the uneven terrain beneath their feet. Jake, however, stuck to the path with deliberate steps, avoiding unnecessary detours, but pushing forward at a steady, unyielding pace. After the second mile, Zinnia started to grow impatient. "Is this really the test?" she asked, brushing leaves from her hair. "We could run circles around you by now." Jake chuckled but didn't slow down. "Could you? Then why haven't you?" Zorak smirked. "We're conserving energy. No point in wasting it." Jake's eyes flicked toward them, his expression unreadable. "That's the thing. Humans don't think like that. When we run, we don't save energy. We burn it until there's nothing left. Then we keep going." The twins frowned, unsure if Jake was exaggerating or genuinely serious. By the 5th mile, the ground began to shift. The path narrowed, sloping uphill toward a ridge covered in loose gravel. Jake pressed forward, barely breaking stride, while the twins found themselves adjusting to avoid slipping. Zinnia's breathing grew heavier. She glanced at Jake, who showed no sign of slowing. "You know," she muttered, "this is getting irritating." Jake smiled without looking at her. "It's supposed to be." Zorak's patience thinned. "Fine. If you want to see speed, let's stop pretending." In one smooth motion, Zorak surged forward, sprinting ahead of Jake with long, powerful strides. Zinnia followed close behind, her alien muscles carrying her across the rocky incline faster than any human could manage. Within seconds, the twins were over the ridge, waiting for Jake at the top. They stood smugly, watching as Jake steadily climbed after them, his pace unchanged. "Impressed yet?" Zorak teased. Leaning against a tree, Jake crested the ridge, wiping sweat from his brow, but still breathing evenly. "Not really," he replied. "You made it up faster, sure, but speed's not the point." Zinnia tilted her head. "Then what is the point?" Jake gestured to the distant horizon, where faint lights from a nearby town flickered in the distance. Endurance isn't about bursts of strength. It's about how long you can last when the finish line feels out of reach. The breaking point. Another mile passed. Then two. The forest thickened again, the air growing colder as mist began to creep across the ground. The incline steepened, and the rough terrain forced the twins to slow down. Jake, however, kept moving, his steady rhythm never faltering. By the 9th mile, Zinnia wiped sweat from her forehead, frustration building. "How are you still going?" she demanded. Jake exhaled softly, shrugging. "Humans are built for endurance. We evolved to chase prey across long distances, sometimes for days. It's part of who we are." Zorak's jaw tightened, his legs beginning to feel the strain. He glanced at Zinnia, noticing she, too, was slowing. Mile 10. Zorak stopped, hands on his knees. "All right. Enough of this," he growled. Zinnia leaned against a tree, chest heaving. "I agree." Jake paused, turning to face them. His breathing was labored but steady, sweat dripping from his brow. But he was still standing. "You can stop if you want," Jake said calmly. "I'm going to keep going." The twins stared at him, momentarily speechless. Zorak frowned. "You're not stronger than us." Jake nodded. "I know." Zinnia's eyes narrowed. "You're not faster than us either." Jake smiled. "I know that too." "Then why?" Jake stepped closer, his gaze steady. "Because strength doesn't always win the fight, and neither does speed. Sometimes the person who refuses to quit is the one who survives." The forest fell silent. Zinnia exhaled slowly, eyes locked with Jake's. "I think I'm starting to understand." Jake nodded. "Good, but this was just the warm-up." As the mist thickened around them, the twins couldn't help but feel something unfamiliar, a quiet respect for the human who refused to stop. The mist hung heavy in the air as Jake led Zorak and Zinnia back toward the factory. The quiet hum of distant insects filled the silence, broken only by the soft crunch of gravel beneath their feet. Zorak lagged a step behind, his usual smirk replaced by a pensive frown. Zinnia, walking beside him, cast wary glances at Jake, who seemed unnervingly at ease despite the grueling trek they had just endured. "I don't get it," Zorak muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Zinnia to hear. "He's not stronger. He's not faster. And yet, here he is, still standing." Zinnia didn't respond immediately. Her legs ached more than she cared to admit, and the idea that a human of all species had outlasted them gnawed at her pride. Jake must have heard them because he glanced over his shoulder with a small smile. "You two did well. Most would have quit miles ago." Zorak shot him a glare. "We didn't quit. We just saw no point in continuing." Jake stopped walking and turned to face them fully. His calm demeanor shifted, and for the first time, His eyes sharpened with something neither twin had expected: intensity. "Seeing no point is exactly why people lose," Jake said, his voice low but firm. "It's the same reason battles are lost before they even start. You don't win by waiting for the right moment. You win by pushing forward when everything tells you to stop." Zinnia crossed her arms. "You think stubbornness counts as strategy?" Jake chuckled softly. "Stubbornness is half the battle. But there's another side to it, something I'm guessing you two don't encounter often." Zorak raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Jake's smile faded. "Fear." The word lingered in the air, heavier than the mist around them. Zinnia tilted her head. "Fear. We've faced creatures 10 times your size. We've fought in skirmishes across star systems. Fear isn't something we struggle with." Jake nodded slowly. "Maybe not the way you think. But fear doesn't just come from battles. Sometimes it comes when everything depends on you thinking clearly, and one mistake means the end." He gestured toward the factory, where faint flickers of light could be seen inside. "Let's put that confidence of yours to the test." Inside the factory, the puzzle of pressure. The factory felt colder than before. The rusted walls groaned faintly as the wind crept through cracks in the metal. Jake guided the twins to a large open area near the center of the structure. In the middle of the room sat a table, and on it lay a sleek rectangular device, smooth, black, and unmarked. Zinnia eyed it suspiciously. Another bomb. Jake shook his head. "No bombs this time. This is a mental test. You'll like this one, I promise." Zorak stepped closer, narrowing his eyes at the object. "What is it?" Jake reached over and tapped the device. The screen flickered to life, displaying a complex grid of interconnected lines, numbers, and symbols. The grid shifted constantly, pieces rearranging in an unpredictable pattern. "It's a simple game," Jake explained. "Align the grids by rotating the pieces, match the symbols, and the game ends. Easy, right?" Zinnia glanced at the screen. The shifting patterns moved fast, almost too fast to follow. She frowned. "This looks less like a game and more like a headache." Jake grinned. "That's the point. See, the catch is, if you don't solve it in time, the screen resets and scrambles again, faster each time." Zorak leaned in, analyzing the grid. "So, speed and focus. I think we can handle that." Jake stepped back, folding his arms. "You've got 5 minutes before the first reset. After that, it gets harder. Let's see how well those superior brains of yours handle pressure." Zinnia sat down first, confident as she placed her fingers on the screen. The grid began to shift rapidly, and she immediately started rotating pieces, aligning several within the first minute. "This isn't so bad," she muttered, eyes narrowing as she focused. Zorak hovered beside her, pointing occasionally at sections she missed. By the second minute, the patterns shifted faster. Zinnia's fingers twitched as she tried to keep up, but the symbols moved unpredictably, changing positions just as she aligned them. "Stay calm," Zorak instructed. "You're rushing." "I'm not rushing," Zinnia snapped. Jake watched silently, his eyes fixed on the timer ticking down. 3 o'clock, 2:45, 2:30. Zinnia's breathing quickened as the grid scrambled suddenly, undoing the progress she had made. "What? No, I was almost there," she growled. Zorak leaned in. "Let me try." Zinnia hesitated but pulled back. Zorak's hands moved faster than hers, spinning the pieces with precision. For a moment, it seemed like he had control. But then, 2 o'clock, 1:45. The grid reset again. Zorak's jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous." Jake's voice broke the tension. "Losing focus." Zorak didn't respond, his hands moving even faster. 1:30, 1:15, 1 o'clock. Zinnia's eyes darted nervously between the timer and the scrambled grid. She could hear the faint strain in Zorak's breathing now, the same way she felt it creeping into her chest. With 30 seconds left, the grid reset one final time, shifting even faster than before. Zorak sat back, frustrated. This is impossible. Jake stepped forward without a word. He placed his fingers on the screen, calm and steady. 30, 29, 28. His movements were smooth, deliberate. Zinnia watched closely. "You're not rushing." Jake nodded. "That's the trick. Most people panic. The faster it moves, the more they try to match the speed. But this isn't a game about speed. It's about staying calm no matter how fast it gets." As he spoke, the symbols aligned. The grid froze, and the screen displayed a simple message: success. Jake glanced at the twins. Fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet pressure of time running out. And if you let it get to you, you'll lose, even if you're stronger, smarter, or faster. Zorak leaned against the table, exhaling slowly. "Humans are strange," he muttered. Zinnia smirked faintly. "Strange, but impressive." Jake chuckled. "You've only seen the beginning." The silence in the factory was thick, almost oppressive, as Jake turned to face Zorak and Zinnia. The twins had just been forced to reckon with the fact that a human, someone they had once considered weak and insignificant, had outsmarted them in a challenge that tested both intellect and composure. The grid puzzle was a mental game, but in many ways, it had also become a battle of willpower. They had been forced to confront their own limits, and they hadn't liked what they saw. But Jake wasn't finished. His eyes gleamed with an intensity that both unnerved and intrigued them. "You think you've seen everything, don't you?" Jake asked, his voice carrying a quiet edge. "But there's more to humanity than anything you've experienced so far. This," he gestured around the factory, "this is only the beginning." Zorak shot a sharp glance at Zinnia, as if silently questioning whether they had truly understood what was at stake here. He had expected brute force, speed, maybe even cunning, but what he had encountered so far was far beyond that. Something deeper, something human. Zinnia was the first to speak, her voice still carrying a hint of defiance, but now mixed with genuine curiosity. "All right, Jake, we've seen your tricks, your endurance, your cleverness. But what is it you want us to learn? What's the point of all this?" Jake's gaze softened slightly, and he walked toward the worn windows of the factory, staring out into the night. The trees swayed gently in the wind, the soft rustling barely audible. "The point, Zinnia, is that humanity doesn't just survive. We evolve. We grow through everything we face, and we face a lot. You want to know what makes humans dangerous. It's not the muscles, the brains, or the tech. It's the will to push through anything, no matter how much it hurts, no matter how many times we fall. We get up, we try again, and we learn from it." Zorak couldn't suppress a scoff. "Learning? From failure? That's hardly a strategy. If you don't have the power to back it up, what's the point?" Jake turned toward them, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, his eyes flickered with a quiet understanding. He was about to show them something far more profound than mere physical or intellectual contests. "I'll show you," Jake said, his voice dropping lower. "But first, you need to understand a few things about humanity. It's not just about surviving. It's about thriving. And sometimes that means pushing through things that no one else would ever even consider. Sometimes we make mistakes that are too big to fix, but we try anyway." Zinnia stepped forward, sensing the seriousness in Jake's tone. "What do you mean by that? What kind of mistakes are you talking about?" Jake walked to the far corner of the factory and, with a sudden motion, pulled a large metal panel away from a wall. Behind it was a series of old photographs and pieces of brittle paper taped to the wall. The images were faded, some barely recognizable, but each told a story of destruction, loss, and growth. Jake stepped closer, pointing to one of the photos. "This," he began, "was taken during a time of great upheaval. A war fought across nations, driven by greed and fear. We nearly destroyed ourselves. We wiped out entire cities. People we loved, people we didn't even know, were lost. Everything seemed hopeless. But in the aftermath, something incredible happened. Zinnia and Zorak exchanged uncertain looks. They had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, some more advanced than humanity, others less so. But this was different. The emotion in Jake's voice was undeniable. It was something they had never seen in any of the species they had encountered. Raw, unfiltered, unshakable grief paired with a quiet strength. Jake continued, pointing to another image. A group of people working together, their hands stained with dirt, their faces tired but determined. This, he said, is what came after the destruction. When we had nothing left, when we had lost so much, we started rebuilding. And we did it together. Every time we fell, we learned. Every time we lost, we found something new to keep fighting for. It wasn't just the survival of our species we cared about. It was our ability to stand tall after falling. Zinnia stepped closer, her gaze flicking between the photos and Jake. There was something about the way the human spoke that was unsettling in its sincerity. So you're telling me that this is how you survive? You just keep getting back up? Jake nodded. Yes, because that's all we can do. And it's what makes us strong. Zorak, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. His expression was no longer filled with mockery, but with something closer to genuine contemplation. That's the thing you're not telling us, isn't it? That humans don't fight for glory or power. You fight for something deeper. For the people around you. For the future. That's why you keep pushing forward, even when the odds are impossible. Jake gave him a small nod. Exactly. Humans don't always win. But we try, and we adapt. That's what makes us dangerous to any species. Not our technology, not our military, but our relentless will to improve, to learn, and to push past anything that tries to hold us down. Zinnia looked down at the floor, clearly processing the weight of Jake's words. She had spent her life believing that only power and efficiency could truly secure victory. She had seen worlds fall before, knowing that they were destined to crumble under their own weight. But what Jake described was something different, something that transcended the mere concept of survival. And you're willing to risk everything for this? Zinnia asked quietly, a trace of uncertainty in her voice. Jake looked her in the eye, his expression resolute. We've already risked everything. And we're still here. The air seemed to thicken with the realization that Jake had just shared a truth so deep, so unshakable, that even the alien twins found themselves at a loss for words. Zorak stepped back, his arms crossed. I've seen entire civilizations fall because they didn't have this kind of resilience, and I've seen the strongest beings crumble when faced with their own limitations. Jake smiled faintly. That's why humans are dangerous. We don't stop when we reach our limits. We find a way to push past them. Zinnia exhaled slowly, looking toward the horizon beyond the factory. Maybe we've been wrong about humans. Maybe there's something to this after all. Jake's gaze softened. It's not about being wrong or right. It's about understanding. And that's what I wanted to show you. It's not just our muscles or brains. It's the heart of who we are. We're willing to fight for our future, even when it seems impossible. And that's a power none of you will ever be able to comprehend, until you see it up close. The twins stood in silence, their minds racing with new thoughts, new questions they had never considered before. This human, this simple being from a small, fragile planet, had shown them something they had overlooked for eons. True, unyielding, and unstoppable resilience. And as the stars glittered above them, the twins realized that, for the first time, they didn't just see a weak species before them. They saw a species that, despite everything, was capable of something far greater: change. The night had deepened, and the factory stood silent, its rusted walls whispering of a bygone era. The mist had finally settled, thickening the air into a cool, almost haunting fog. Jake, Zorak, and Zinnia stood at the center of the room, the quiet weight of the conversation still hanging in the air like a heavy mist. The alien twins, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves adrift in a sea of uncertainty. For the first time, the idea of humanity, its true nature, was no longer something to mock or underestimate. Jake had done more than simply outblast them in tests of strength, speed, and intellect. He had exposed them to a truth about humanity that they hadn't even realized they were missing. A truth about resilience, about enduring hardship not as a weakness, but as the foundation for strength. Zinnia stood near one of the shattered windows, staring out into the distance, her mind churning. "You're right, Jake," she said softly, almost as if speaking to herself. "I always thought power was the answer, the one thing that mattered. But there's something about your species, something about your will to continue, even when everything seems lost, that I didn't see before." Zorak, who had been standing silently, nodded slowly. "It's not something I would have believed if you told me about it. I've seen entire armies crumble before superior strength, superior technology. And yet, here you are, still standing." He turned his gaze toward Jake. "You made me realize something. It's not the strength of your bodies or the brilliance of your minds. It's your ability to keep going, to rebuild from the ashes and rise even stronger." Jake smiled faintly, his expression sincere but without pride. "It's not just about rising again. It's about what you choose to build when you do. Humanity doesn't just survive. We adapt. We evolve. That's what makes us unique. We never stop trying to better ourselves, to understand what we're capable of." Zinnia slowly turned back toward Jake, her eyes thoughtful. "I've seen countless worlds fall, some from external forces, some from their own doing. And I thought that's what would happen to you too. I thought humans were just a species that couldn't compete. But now I see it differently." Jake took a deep breath, his voice calm and steady. "We've had our fair share of failures. Humanity has made mistakes, huge ones. Wars, famine, destruction. But each of those mistakes, each of those falls, taught us something. We learned from them. And that's why we're still here. That's why we'll always be here." Zorak's expression softened. The cold arrogance that had once filled his features was now tempered with something closer to respect. "I understand now. You don't win by being the strongest or the smartest. You win by never giving up, no matter what. That's what makes you dangerous. You might not have the raw power of other species, but you've got something far more powerful." Zinnia nodded in agreement, though her tone carried a touch of humility. "Your ability to adapt, to overcome failure. I didn't understand that. I didn't think it could be enough. But it's everything." Jake watched them both, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. "It's not always easy. We don't have the luxury of superhuman strength or perfect technologies. But that's okay. We've learned to rely on something much stronger than any weapon." He paused, letting the silence settle around them before adding, "We rely on each other." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Zinnia and Zorak didn't speak. Instead, they let the weight of the statement settle in. They had traveled far across the galaxy, met countless species, observed their strengths and weaknesses. But this, what Jake had shown them, was something none of them had ever considered. The human species didn't just survive on its own individual strength. It thrived through unity, through shared struggle, through the willingness to face the impossible together. Zinnia exhaled slowly. "Humans, you don't just fight to survive. You fight for each other. You fight for something bigger than yourselves." Zorak, who had always prided himself on his species' individual superiority, now saw things from a different angle. "That's why you can't be counted out. You may not have the same physical advantages we do, but you have something we don't. A purpose, a reason to push forward no matter the cost." Jake nodded, his expression unwavering. "That's what makes humanity unique. We're not just trying to live. We're trying to make the world better for everyone. even if we don't always succeed. And if we fail, we try again. We don't quit. We never stop trying. There was a long pause as the alien twins took it all in. Zinnia's sharp eyes softened with understanding, and Zorak, for the first time since they'd arrived on Earth, seemed genuinely introspective. Zinnia's voice broke the silence, her tone surprisingly gentle. "You've changed the way we see your species, Jake. We came here to observe, to prove that humans were weak and insignificant. But now I'm not so sure. You've shown us something we didn't expect. We thought we knew everything about strength, but now we know there's more to it than we ever imagined." Zorak looked at his sister, then back to Jake, his expression sincere. "You've earned my respect, human. I never thought I'd say that. But there's more to strength than what we've been taught. You've proven that. And I've learned that there's more than one way to be powerful." Jake smiled, his eyes reflecting something deeper than simple pride, something closer to gratitude. "I'm glad you understand. That's all I wanted to show you. You don't need to be the strongest to be the best. Sometimes it's about finding strength in the places you least expect. In unity, in resilience, in the will to keep fighting." Zinnia's eyes softened, her previous arrogance replaced by something new. Respect, perhaps even admiration. Humans are more than just survivors. You're fighters, in every sense of the word. Zorak stepped forward, offering a hand to Jake. A gesture of respect, of acknowledgement. "Perhaps there is more to your kind than we ever gave credit for. I can see now that humanity's true power lies not in the fight, but in the will to never stop, no matter the cost." Jake grasped Zorak's hand firmly, a silent acknowledgement of their mutual understanding. "Exactly. And maybe one day, you'll see just how much we're capable of when we work together." The two alien twins looked at each other one last time, a quiet understanding passing between them. They had come to Earth thinking they would find only weakness, only fragility. But instead, they had discovered a species far more complex, far more resilient than they had ever imagined. With a final nod, Zorak and Zinnia turned to leave, the soft hum of their pods coming to life in the distance. As they ascended into the night sky, they carried with them not only a new understanding of humanity, but a deep respect for a species that had earned its place among the stars, not through power or technology, but through the unbreakable will to keep going, no matter the odds. And as the stars twinkled above them, they realized that maybe, just maybe, humans were far stronger than anyone could ever have predicted.